My name is David Nelson. I am the Reentry Training Manager for the Missouri Department of Corrections and fortunate enough to serve on the board of the International Association of Corrections Training Personnel, and would like to welcome you to today's webinar on classroom control in the digital age. We'll take a quick roll call down the list here to see who we have. Stuart?
I'm here.
You are? Thank you. How about Tammy Bremer? Maybe chat in if you don't have audio controls. Just let us know that you're here. Thank you, Tammy, for doing that. Shelly?
I'm here.
Say, I know Shelly's here. I've been seeing her before. Hang with us, Tammy. We got your text. We got your chat in. It looks like everything's going well for you. And then is it Oyumi? Had registered. How about Regina Graves?
I'm here.
Thank you. Welcome, Regina. Are you in Florida, or where are you at with Geo?
I'm in Los Angeles.
In LA. Well, all right. Welcome. How about Jordan Hurst? Jordan? As we move down the list, Reggie Jackson? I think I saw Reggie's name. Awesome. Thank you, Reggie. Michael Jones, part of our support staff that helps keep things running so well for us with Iactp. He's on board, and I'll give him a chance to speak here in just a minute. How about Maria from Ohio? Maria?
Yes, I'm here.
Awesome. Thank you. Glad you're with us today. Shaloma? See how well I'm doing with all these names. All right. Rosalie?
I'm here.
Awesome. Kelly? I think I saw Kelly's name. Thank you, Kelly. I see you chatted in. Thank you. Mary O'Connor from the great state of Arizona. Here. Thank you, Mary. Hello.
I'm here. Hello.
Maybe Geraldine or Nicole. Looks like we had a couple sign in from DOC in New York. All right. Tammy? Thank you, Tammy. Tammy Reisinger. Got a couple of Tammys signed up for today. Okay, how about Paul Shavak or Shavik? Hello, Paul. Thank you for chatting in. And looks like a couple led Jeffrey. Jim Wiseman.
Yes, sir.
I know Jim's down the hall. Good morning, Jim, once again. And then how about Meredith from Ohio? I think Meredith was one of our last registrants to sign up. Well, thank you all for letting me get through that roll call. What that did is that gave us just a minute or two to kind of check the audio levels and see maybe as you've gathered by now, some of us have complete audio access to this webinar, and some are simply chatting in. Michael and I will be watching the chat box to make sure that we include your comments and solicit your input as we proceed. For those of you all that do have audio controls and audio participation, if you would be sure and mute for us today while we're on the call. And that way, if you have any of those distractions or any kind of things that maybe would come out of your office or your area that you're at that would be a distraction, we can keep those to a minimum. As I introduce myself, my name is David. We're here to talk about classroom control in the digital age. We're going to take a look in the next hour about how we can maybe provide some classrooms to our students that are going to be a little more distraction free. And, you know, we know as instructors that sometimes those distractions are not things that we have provided, but sometimes it's distractions that the students bring in the classroom with them. And there's been some innovative approaches and some research that's done. We'll take a look at some of that, and we'll take a look at how can we address these things as we get rolling. One thing I'd like you to do, if you'll take a look on the right side of your screen, there's a little chat box, a chat window. If you would please chat in for us your home state, where you have dialed in from this afternoon. And that way we can take a look and see how many different departments, how many different agencies we have listed. So we'll take just a quick minute there. They're starting to scroll in. Delaware, Maine, Arizona, West Virginia, California, of course, my home state of Missouri, we see on there. Try to see some of the others popped in. West Virginia, North Dakota, and Ohio. We have got a great group. We had a couple registered from New York. I haven't seen anything out of them yet. And we also had one participant, so that you know this is an international organization that we're a part of. We did have one registrant from Nigeria who had signed up to participate today. So be interesting to see if he's able to join us, able to check in and get with us before the meeting ends. And we see Cleveland, Ohio hosted us with our conference last year, and we had a great time there. As far as kind of the wizard behind the scenes making the program run for us today, Michael, I'll give you the mic for just a minute and let you introduce yourself, and then we'll get started with our training, please.
Okay, I'm Michael Jones. I'm the Association Services Manager for Iactp. I've been in this role for just about a year now, so I think I've learned most of the ropes, but you never know. David's already mentioned the key thing with the webinar. If you're connected by audio, if you could please keep your line muted unless you're interacting with the presenter. That cuts down on a lot of feedback and distractions for everyone else. At the end of the webinar, I will be sending out an email with a copy of your certificate for attendance, as well as a link to a survey that takes about 2 minutes at most to complete, just some feedback that would help guide us as we do future webinars. So thank you for being here. David, I'll turn it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Michael, he's just done a great job helping keep all of us on the right track and making sure that we're proceeding and doing the things we need to do as an organization. So if you would, post in there any chat questions that you have. Michael will be watching that with me as we proceed. And depending on how our time flows, when we get to the very end of the hour, if we've got a minute or two left, I may roll the audio over to Jim Wiseman. He is our president-elect, and he's looking forward to welcoming us all at the conference in Nashville this fall. So, Jim, if we have time, I'll let you get a plug in for that at the very end. But as we get started, what we're all here to talk about this afternoon, we look at classroom control, and we talk about how can we as instructors get our participants involved. Do we maybe take a look at questions that will guide and encourage interaction? And we're going to take a look. We've got about an hour. We'll take a look at some different ways that our students can become distracted, and maybe how can we manage the distracted student. If you would, please, if you have audio, would you mute your phones for us? We're getting just a little bit of abstract noise coming in. Thank you for that. If we take a look, one study I'm going to quote later in the presentation from the Chronicle of Higher Education, and that author and that researcher actually questioned that is it the instructor's fault if we haven't engaged our students enough that they want to be free of distractions while we're in the classroom. So that was kind of an interesting perspective that I came across. And again, we'll talk about this study a little more later on as we go. But the important thing that we see is that age-old adage of we as instructors need to plan our work and plan our presentation, and then we need to make sure that we work that plan and that we carry it out during the time that we have with our learners. The skill of asking good questions is really the same thing to a trainer as maybe a hammer is to a carpenter. We just can't train effectively without those good questions. But what we see and what I've experienced in the classrooms that I've observed in is that often either we as presenters don't plan out our questions ahead of time, or maybe we don't think through how to use them. And thus we maybe have some problems when we go to soliciting feedback that we can use to guide those discussions in the classroom, or even how we can evaluate and facilitate the learning process. So one of the first things I want us to take a look at today is discovering be better prepared. So I would ask you, and again, a tag in that chat box for us, please, our first question, what are some common ways that students in our classes respond to questions? students in our classroom, when we are leading as instructors to repeat, what are some common ways that students respond? And let's take a look and see what scrolls in over that chat window.
I don't see it.
Yep, thank you, Jim. Sometimes we just see silence. And we want to make sure we don't misinterpret that silence, because sometimes those learners are taking the chance to process and maybe more fully think about what it is that we've asked. Nonverbals, Mary, absolutely. We can really tell. We get a good read from those participants as we're taking a look at them. Maria's going to mention side conversations. Yep, I spent 3 days in training last week, and one thing I found very interesting was that not only were there some side conversations going on, but what I was able to observe is that those side conversations were actually tied to the material that the presenter was presenting. So they really weren't kind of off-traffic sidebars. They were more people talking about what it is they were seeing. Other things that we see, Jim has questioned those nonverbals. What do they tell you, right? Are we connecting with that student, or is the student taking the advantage to kind of mentally check out for a few minutes? Reggie, right. How do we handle those unrelated material responses when we see them? Tammy says maybe they're going to sit and do other work. Yeah, sadly, we've kind of all had these same students, haven't we? And then the last one, we see those blank stares. Yep. One of the techniques that we use here in Missouri is a questioning technique that we've tagged as a check for understanding, because sometimes we learn from those blank stares that maybe the class doesn't understand fully what it is that we've asked them to do. So we can tell that they do seem familiar to us. We see some repeat ideas, but when we ask these questions and we are met with a blank stare or those unrelated material responses, what has kind of happened? Where is the discussion that maybe we anticipated that we would have as an instructor? Because bottom line, what we're trying to find out is, do the students really understand what it is that we're asking them to do? And that's one of the things that we are going to take advantage of to talk about in this time that we have together today, is how can we move beyond these responses that maybe we didn't want, these one syllable or two syllable answers, and how can we proceed more into a more gainful interaction with our students? So let's take a look real quick at what our performance objectives are for today. And what we see is we want to take a real quick look at what are some best ways that have been established for us as instructors. How can we develop questions and checks for understanding in our classrooms? And we're going to take a look as we wrap it up at the end of our block of instruction, this disruptive behavior. And I'll throw some samples out there and give us a chance to kind of brainstorm and determine how can we manage these types of situations to make sure that we're able to remain focused in the classroom. So as we get started, I'm going to present you with about 4 questions, and I'll scroll them up here on the screen one at a time. And what I would like for us to do is of course, we'll use this chat window. We post those responses in the chat, and we will take a chance for me to read through those and we'll discuss them. So as the questions come up, post them in the chat box for us. And let's take a look. The first question for us to take a look at in this fashion today. When I ask questions in the classroom, I hope for or I expect blank. What is it that we're expecting will happen when we ask questions in the classroom? Engagement? Right. We want to see that response. Maybe more than one response that will generate a conversation. Perfect. Thank you for that one. We mainly want to see some discussion, don't we? We want to see that the participants are tapping into their experience. If we can help them make it relevant and find that link, we'll be able to maintain that connection with them throughout our learning experience. We're also going to be looking for some valuable feedback, because that feedback will maybe help us decide when we can proceed to the next question or when we will be able to move on. Very good. Thank you. Let's take a look, Jim. Yes, the right answer, that deeper dialogue. Thank you. Let's take a look at the next question, number 2. When I ask a question and get no response, I, as a trainer, how do I feel? And how do I tend to react when that occurs? When I ask a question and get no response, I feel, what do we see coming up? Out of touch. Thank you, Maria. That's tough, isn't it? When we take a look and we ask a question and we just see nothing coming back. And with kind of that disconnect, we feel in the weeds, right? Concerned, maybe. And what do I tend to do? Boy, Tammy, I'm trying to see as they scroll in there real quick. We're going to check, Tammy says, do we make sure that we're going to check to understand, to make sure that they see what we've done? And Geraldine, I wanted to make sure we got back to your comment. Thank you for sharing that. We're going to be call on someone to prompt responses. Absolutely. We want to make sure that we're reaching out to reconnect, because we can pull that student right back in, or we can pull that group right back in. Uncomfortable and tend to probe farther. Thank you, Paul. You're absolutely right. What can we do? And we see some great examples. I tend to ask people one-on-one. Yep. Thank you, Kelly, for that one. Maybe did I miss my target? Do I need to aim different? Do I need to refire in a different direction or with a different question? And again, as we see here from Regina, right? If the question was not clear, maybe I need to clarify and ask it in a different way. Great. That's 2 of the 4. Let's take a look at the next one. Number 3 question is, when I ask a question, oh, here we come. What if we get an incorrect or an off-the-wall response? Then what do we do? How do you feel when we get that unexpected or off-the-wall response? And what do we do? See, many of these answers are applicable that we've come before, right? Clarify. Again, how do we make sure it was understood? We're curious. Why did they respond in the way they did? And Tammy, great point. How can we feed off of it and make them valued for sharing their response, but to get it back on track? As Shelley says, yep, we're going to be concerned and ask for some clarification. Oftentimes, maybe that'll just be a simple misunderstanding or something that maybe pushed us in that incorrect direction. Okay. We want to make sure we don't offend the student. We don't want to say it was wrong, right? Once we lose that student, we will spend the rest of the block of instruction trying to get them back. And sometimes that's a hill that we just can't climb because it's too steep. Depending on the response. Yep, let's take advantage. Is it a teaching moment? Great answers. Let's take a look at number 4. The next and last thing that I wanted us to handle in this guided practice. Effective questions. Why do we think they're a valuable tool for the trainer? Last question. Effective questions are a valuable tool for the trainer because absolutely, Rosalie. Thank you for that. We're going to use them because we can gauge learning, gauge the class, prompts the students to think. We can steer training. A discussion, Mary says, is much better than a lecture. Absolutely. We're not there to listen to me as the instructor. We're there to listen to the material we presented. They give us insight, Jim says. Thank you, Jim. Whether our participants are actually getting it. And of course, Regina is right on board again. We can engage the learner, check for feedback, provide a measurement of effectiveness. And it is, as Tammy shares with us, it's a great tool for engaging the class. Yep, we want to make sure that we're able to continue to roll with what we're doing. So as we take a look at these questions that we've been talking about, what we want to dive into next, how do we write them? We've identified expectations. We've talked about the benefits. We've even, shared a few of our concerns and issues regarding when we present questions to our students in the classroom. But maybe we need to realize and take a look at some guidelines that have been shown to maybe help us write and ask that effective question to our students. And maybe we want to take a look at even asking them before the training or after the training. So if we look specifically at before the training, how can we, or what can we do to make sure that the questions that we ask are leading to the objectives of our training program? When we develop questions before the training, we need to make sure that they lead to the objectives. And we need to take a look at, are they clear and are they concise? Because again, we want to make sure that we're crafting that conversational goal that we're going to have with our students in such a fashion that the answers that we're soliciting are tied directly into the objectives. And lastly, we want to take a look, are these questions going to be thought-provoking? Okay, are they open-ended? Okay, and just as a quick refresher, what is an open-ended question? See what scrolls into the chat window as we talk about open-ended questions for just a quick response. Shelley says yes, it's a question that prompts a discussion. It requires more than just a yes or no answer. Yep, we kind of see that we really love, as trainers, love to use these open questions. If we use a closed question, we're going to get a response, but it really doesn't spur the class on to continue to think. Yep, maybe we're going to take a look at probing how and what do you think and why. Okay, we need to try to make sure that we're not setting ourselves up for those 1 or 2 word responses. So for us as trainers, as we're prepping our class, we want to make sure that we're prepping those questions as well. All right, as we continue to talk about effective, how we write and ask those effective questions, how about now during the training? During the class, we need to make sure that we consider a couple of things. And this first one here, these things are kind of ones that maybe I've struggled with in my classrooms over time. We want to make sure that we ask the questions one at a time. And even especially in our digital webinar format that we're using today, we need to make sure that when I ask a question, that we let those answers scroll in, because if I ask maybe 2 or 3 questions, it's going to be difficult to manage and juggle those responses to see what it is that's coming in and which ones they're starting to answer. We dealt with already today, we talked about that silence. We want to make sure we're allowing the think time so that we can avoid confusion. We want to make sure that we're really dialing into that answer that I am looking for as the instructor. But, you know, as we think about learning, as we think about think time and silence, make sure that we remember our learning styles or the learning characteristics of those folks that are in our classroom. We want to make sure primarily that we're giving folks a chance to think about their responses, but we also want to make sure that maybe we've got those reflective learners in the classroom and they need time to think about what it is they're going to say and what they want to say before those active learners are just going to jump on and blurt out a response in the very beginning. All right, it can also be beneficial to our learners for us to give an example, right? Maybe we want to prime that pump a little bit and make them feel just a little more comfortable about what it is that they're going to say. We can build them a safety zone. We can give them a chance. And another last point that I've got pulled out here for us during the training, if we're using maybe a policy-based example or a regulation or a rule or even a statute-based presentation, we want to make sure that we give them a chance to look up their responses. You know, if we have a manual that we're expecting them to use or some other type of learning aid, maybe we want to build in time in our presentation to give them a chance to use it. All right, we want them to learn that material. We want them to know where that resource is. So let's give them a chance, because really what we're trying to do with our presentation as we look at learning and performance, because those are the 2 keys we want to link together in our presentations. What are we doing to help our participants both learn and remember what it is that we want them to take with them out of our presentation? We give them the chance to look up answers. We help them realize they're responsible for their own learning. We maybe empower them to not be intimidated because we're going to remove that chance for them to say, I don't know. And we're going to provide some repetition. And we're also encouraging them, we're drawing their attention back to the training materials that we have. So to review another little guided practice, and I think if we can with this one, Michael, let's give everybody a chance to maybe speak up. So I'm going to ask this question, and those of y'all that have that verbal, those audio capabilities, maybe chime in and let us know that you want to speak. Maybe type an X, and that'll be Michael's cue to let us know that you're coming in. But the question that I would have, let's take a look one more time at why do participants ask questions? What are some reasons that they ask questions? And let's give you a chance to chime in real quick as we roll into this next block of instruction. Who would like to step up and speak to that? Shelley?
They asked for clarification.
Yep, that clarification is going to help them stay on track, won't it?
Yes.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you, Shelley. Anybody else? How can we get you to chime in? They want to add their voice and their experience. Yep, we know that that's one of the keys as we work with the adult learners. If we can validate their experience, we can very quickly get them to take our side or to take the side of the material that we have in the classroom. This is going to help us provide some, excuse me, provide some clarification. Sometimes they'll speak up because they're maybe going to try to trip us up, right? If we have maybe a policy-based presentation, and we want to make sure that we get them the information that we need. So as we take a look at questions, we also want to make sure that we take a look at what are some appropriate responses. Right, Tammy, we want to definitely make sure we enjoy that dialogue, don't we? Because that's what we're in there for. But as we take a look at enjoying that dialogue, let's just build right on Tammy's comment and take a look now at when we respond to questions, what are some guidelines? Maybe we can refer the question to the entire group, right? We can say, hey, group, Shelley just had a question. This is what she's asked me. We've got a lot of great experience in the classroom today. Let's call on some of your experience. How can you all help me answer the question that Shelley just shared? Maybe we can refer it. Do we need to redirect the question, right? Maybe we need to say, well, you know, you're asking me, but what do you think? Or share with us as the questioner, what has your experiences been with us? Maybe we can refer it back to the printed material in front of them. Based on that information that we've just reviewed, what do you think might happen, right? We can also take a look at a qualified answer, right? Maybe if we don't know, we need to take a chance to do a little research on our own and report back, because in the best case scenario, we'll be able to refer either to a subject matter expert that we have in our agency. Maybe we'll be able to refer to a policy. A great example of this would be some training I was at just last week. And we had a consultant who had come in to present a block of material. And the participants in the class were asking some very detailed policy-specific questions about the material that was being presented. And I thought our consultant, the presenter, did a great job responding to the answers, but she was also very quick to get out a pencil and paper, and she said, you know, this is a question that I can't answer for the group right now. Let me jot this down, and I will get back in touch with the representative agency that had contacted her and had her come for the presentation. And she says, I'll get an answer to you and I will follow up with that. And you know, to her credit, not only did she walk the walk, she talked the talk on that, because we took a brief break for lunch. We came back from lunch and she rolled us right into that presentation block in the afternoon by answering specifically those questions that she was presented that morning. And that really helped her build with us some of that street cred that we all strive for so hard when we're presenting, to make sure that we're going to be responsive and that our students see us. Another situation that can be sticky for us in the classroom as we generate a response, what if we are challenged, right? There's always, there's typically the potential for there to be someone that is going to challenge us. And what are some ways that we can respond effectively when we are challenged, right? We can respond with policy and state, you know, this is a must-do response. This is why we're presenting it this way, is because this is what the agency has asked us to do. But we've also learned that it's important for us to acknowledge those feelings that that participant has, but then quickly for us in our role as the trainer and the facilitator, we need to make sure that we bring that focus right back directly to the objectives of the training. Let's keep that discussion about the learning and performance that we're there to accomplish for the day's presentation, and make sure we don't let it fall apart into a them versus us, or a me because I'm simply the expert in the classroom, because we're going to have a lot of subject matter knowledge in the classrooms that we present in. Again, as you heard me say, if we're challenged, other ways, acknowledge their feelings and make sure that we refocus right back on there. We want to make sure that as we're answering these questions, that this is not just, you know, there's a lot of ways that we can manage our students' activities in the classroom, some ways that we can take a look at how do we manage the activities and how do we manage the responses. And for us, what I see in the classrooms that I present in and in the classrooms that I kind of evaluate and provide monitoring, what we see and kind of what we're all logged in here to talk about is disruptive behaviors. What I want us to do is, you know, those participants come into our classrooms and we can tell very quickly as instructors, can't we? Sometimes they have a chip on their shoulders, maybe because they don't want to be there. And they are forced to, you know, to be in there with us for the block of instruction. Some folks just simply don't like training. And sometimes those attitudes can be contagious, can't they? They can lead to behaviors that really cause problems if you let it get out of hand. And we as trainers need to do what? We need to respond initially, and we need to respond sometimes immediately to make sure that we can address that behavior before it gets out of hand and sours the rest of the group, or gets us off track to the point that it's going to be very difficult for us to come back. And again, us as the trainer in that situation, we want to make sure that we don't lose control either of ourselves or of our audience, because that can happen so quickly. So take a look for us just a minute in those classrooms that you're familiar with, that you've presented in. Maybe chime in, give us an X so we can call on you. Share with us maybe what you've learned. Why were your classrooms disrupted? And maybe how did the participants behave this way? And then thirdly, we see listed there on the slide kind of the more dangerous or insightful question. You know, who's at fault? Was it the student or the instructor? I think we can probably all look back at times where, you know, we wish we could reel back in that response that we just spit out and maybe respond in a better way, right? Make sure we respect all those that are in the classroom. Or as Jim points out, maybe we didn't set proper ground rules up front. One of the cognitive restructuring programs that we use here in my agency, one of the kickoff activities is you ask the group to develop a set of ground rules for the group to follow during the day or during the training presentation. And if time allows, or if the group is of the proper size, you can even ask your group to come up and autograph or initial that rules page, and then you hang it right there on the wall. And I have found that to be helpful, especially in some difficult groups, because then all of a sudden you can call it and say, hey, well, now wait a minute, I think this was something that we established earlier, was outside the ground rules for our class. And then all of a sudden it's me enforcing our rules for the day instead of me enforcing my rules for the day, right? Sometimes we want to make sure that this bad behavior is not tolerated. And what do we see Kelly tagging in? You know, maybe they're disgruntled at work in general, and is there going to be a humorous response that we can bring in? Some great points, some great responses. Thank you for sharing those with us. So let's take a look now that we've kind of highlighted some of these, bad situations. I'm sure we're picturing in our minds some of those horror stories. Let's take a look more specifically at disruptive behavior. Okay, when participants are behaving badly, right, which was one of the topics I thought about making a slide out of, it can have a different effect on the instructor than it has on the participants. And we need to maybe do some engagement of how can we prevent the behavior. Tammy, I like your comment, right? Don't engage with the hecklers. Sometimes, as Geraldine says, sometimes they just need to be heard. They need to get it off their chest. But, on the other hand, if their disruptive behavior is maybe presenting a contrary point to our agency, or is perpetuating a myth of something that we know is not factual, we need to make sure that we are comfortable in our role as a trainer being the officer of the day, so to speak, for that classroom, or being in control, right? Sometimes our students, as we've identified, sometimes they're intimidated or they're bored. Maybe they don't fully comprehend the purpose of their training. And as Jim has pointed in, if we don't address the behavior, it only gets worse. Yes, it does. It expands. It grows. It is very contagious. Okay, maybe they feel training is a waste of time, and we want to make sure that we engage them so that we can help see what it is that would help them feel that it's not a waste of time. Okay, how about on the instructor? It helps, it sometimes makes us feel irritated. Maybe it's a loss of control for us in the classroom, or even sometimes just that nervousness feeling starts to permeate. We kind of get those sweaty palms, especially if you make the mistake and realize you're standing right in that spotlight that's coming off your projector. The heat's coming up in a couple of different places. All right. Geraldine, you're absolutely right. If they are combative, absolutely, we need to take a break. And we need to make sure that we address that behavior. Make sure that we address it one-on-one when that's appropriate. Because you know what? There's lots of other ways that we can, in my agency, we present classes sometimes on a rotating basis. And if we need to get that bad apple out of the barrel, if we need to get that bad attitude out of the room, we want to make sure that we're able to do that. But we also want to make sure we manage that appropriately, don't we? We don't want to, stoop to their level. And we want to make sure that we respond in that professionally appropriate way that our agency would appreciate, just as we would respond in the same way to someone that we supervised that was in our supervisory chain of command. Reggie, you're absolutely right with your comment. Be strong in our role as that person in charge. Know and use your options. That's very important for us, isn't it? Make sure we know who our phone a friends are, or if you're training on site at a location where maybe you have some other supervisors or some colleagues or peers available, how can they help us? But most importantly, how can we prevent this behavior? We can prevent it by making sure that we are prepared and making sure that we are well organized, right? We've got to be on our A game every minute that we're on, every time that we're up on that platform in front of the classroom. Make sure that we set ground rules when necessary. Maybe we want to conduct our own expectation sharing. Let them know what it is that I'm expecting to do, right? We don't want to ever embarrass or belittle. You're absolutely right, Geraldine. That'll just make things worse. How do we want to make sure that we give clear instructions, and we've got to make sure we pay attention to those group dynamics, and we can do that both through our competence, because we're prepared, and as Tammy shares, through our confidence, because we can be, well-versed and well-grounded in what it is that we're doing. Right? There are some situations where even when we are the best prepared, we are going to have situations where we fail or where we're going to run into some problem participant behavior. And if we take a look at our digital classroom, as we kind of come to the second half of our block of presentation, and we draw it into kind of today's classroom, we talk about who is at fault when those distractions occur, right? Are we at fault because we haven't set good guidelines? Are our students at fault because they bring those distractions with them? And lastly, or do we want to take a look at what is it that we tolerate? And this is where I want to refer to that research, that article from the Chronicle of Higher Education. And there's a professor who writes for the Chronicle. And I call this a reading assignment. What I think I want to do is I'll share this link with you all at the end, and I will send it out with you. I think for time's sake, I just kind of want to talk our way through this article that he wrote. But what he said, he's a professor of English, and he's the director for the Center of Teaching Excellence at Assumption College in Massachusetts. And he writes about distractions and digital distractions in his article in the Chronicle. And what I found interesting in his point was that if we find our students distracted by their phones, by their tablets, by those digital things they bring into the classroom, have we ever thought about that maybe we ourselves as the instructor are the ones that are at fault? And I found that interesting when I read through to kind of flip that blame scenario, because his point was, you know, he writes about a student in his class. She was a very high achiever. She completed her assignments on time. She had very good grades. So she was managing his classroom very successfully. But one thing he discovered is that she would very discreetly position her phone right there at her feet, you know, kind of in her purse, in a book bag, in a way that she could monitor her text messages while she's in class. And this is a direct quote. He says, "When I walked out of class after discovering her surreptitious phone scanning, the questions I asked myself were about her and my ability to control her behavior while she was in my classroom." I continue to quote, "Why can't she focus in my class? And how can I keep students away from their distractions while they are in my classroom?" But it wasn't until he considered that experience through a different lens that a different set of questions began to emerge. And this is what I found interesting as I've tried to take a look at the students in my classrooms here in Missouri this way. As an instructor, what goal have I set for those students for the day? And me as the instructor, having established that goal, have I created an environment that supports the students' abilities to achieve that goal? Another prime example, if I've established that goal and set it out there, does she, again, back to his example, does this student know what that goal is? And how have I communicated that goal with her? So if she's not on track with me and my goal for the program, is that her fault or is that my fault as the instructor? I need to make sure that I'm maintaining ownership over those goals, but I need to make sure it's a group ownership in our classroom. We know, I'm continuing to kind of paraphrase from the article, from our experiences, that we can shut out distractions when we need to, right? Those things that really matter to us, we do tune out of. So as he writes, if we want to deal with distractions in our teaching, an obvious place to turn would be towards our goals for the classroom. And more importantly, how much do they matter? How much do they matter to me? And how much do they matter to the students? And his insightful questions to himself. Had I established, he asked, a clear goal for her learning that day? And how had I helped her understand? And how had I helped her take ownership of that goal? She's always going to have those distractions, right? But it's her choice as to whether she's going to put those distractions aside. Those same limitations plague us all. Another challenge I would throw out there for us, if we are evaluating or monitoring another classroom and another instructor, are we distraction-free in the back of the room, and are we modeling that distraction-free behavior for those students? How can we be that silent supporter of that student that's in our classroom and a silent supporter of that instructor that's in the front of the room. So I'm going to throw this back to you all now for some additional discussion and Q&A. And I really would like to pull in some more audio, some more verbal responses. So those of you that have us on mute, kind of take a chance to unmute and chime in with us for some answers. What I want to do is I want to throw these out there. And those of y'all that are chatting, Michael will help us take a look. And Jim, great follow-up question. I would definitely say no, we should not let our co-trainers use their digital device in the back of the classroom. Right, I know in my agency, you know, we do a lot of co-training. That's a great opportunity to have a partner in there in the classroom with us as we present. But I need that co-trainer in the back of the room, you know, helping me maintain my focus and maybe helping maintain that classroom from that back view, from that backseat view. Because I know there's times, and Jim, I'm sure, would share with you if I gave him the opportunity, or I've been up front instructing and I've thought things are going gangbusters and going great. I've got Jim in the back of the room, either co-training with me or observing, and he's making a list. Well, David, why didn't you address this? Or David, why didn't you tell this student to do that? And I get that dumbfounded deer in the headlight look. It's like, man, I was up front and I didn't even see that stuff going on. So sometimes those more eyes we get in the classroom are better. So let's take a look. Situationally for us in the classroom, what I want you to do is take a look at these situations as I present them. I'll scroll them across the screen at you. And what I want for us to do is take a look at what are some ways that we can handle these distractions as we see them in the classroom. And most importantly for us, I want us to share our responses. Those who have been in my classroom can see I'm maybe sometimes quick to drop the hammer, and we want to make sure that we realize that that's not our only solution, because what do we know? If the only tool we have is a hammer, then we're going to take a look at every problem as a nail, right? And we're simply just going to pound, pound, pound. And there's a lot of good ways to respond. So let's take a look at our first situation and discuss with us, please, how do we respond? So we will cue that last couple of bars of the Jeopardy music, and let's take a look. What can we have audio-wise? Would someone speak up, please, and share with us some ways we could address this? All right, Shelley, you're quick to chime in. What are some ideas you would have?
I would bring them into the discussion, ask them a question, get them engaged through conversation, or maybe stand next to them so they know I'm aware that I know that they're reading the paper. There are several different things you can do with that kind of situation.
Yep,
even on break.
Yep, as we're fortunate enough to be able to be mobile in the classroom, right, to move around. It's amazing sometimes how quick those magazines get put away. Thank you, Shelley. Let's take a look at what scrolled in through the chat window while we were listening to Shelley. Call on them to be a note taker. Absolutely, what a great idea. Another situation is the perfect example. If we've got somebody that's the clock watcher, maybe we would want to ask them to be the timekeeper. We can ask them a question, as we heard Shelley just say just now, or maybe go stand near them, walk around the classroom. Maybe our presence is going to simply get that distraction put away as we walk over. Maybe we're going to ask a directed question. Absolutely. Kelly, what can we do to bring them in? And absolutely, we're going to address that over break and make sure we get that put away. Thank you for that. Maybe wait a few minutes, see if they're going to engage. Those are some great responses. Thank you. Let's take a look at scenario number 2. And how can we deal with the response to this distraction as it occurs or as we see it beginning to form? All right, maybe a good clarifying question, right? We need to ask, maybe when does the training end? Are they going to miss too much? Maybe what is your agency policy? Or, what are his plans to make up the class? And of course, we need to make sure that we know when is the training over. Because if it's going to end while the student is out, there may be no reason for him to come back. And again, we need to make sure we know what our agency's specific policies are. Is this something that we need to encourage this student to have a conversation with their supervisor? Is this something per our agency where we could schedule him to come back to maybe make up that last hour or two that's going to be missed? Or is our agency policy one where, this is a class that if you miss that much, you're going to have to come back and retake the whole course? Exactly. Thanks, Tammy. Did he say anything to a supervisor? Reggie's saying, is this leave pre-approved? Right. Is this something that we should have known ahead of time? All right. As we see, maybe he'll have to retake the class. Absolutely. Let's scroll on. We are getting through good time here. We're managing our time well. I thank you all for that. Our next scenario, take a look at this one and see what happens. See what we can come up with. So here we have the participant who says, I don't agree. Or we have that participant who says, where I used to work, this is the way we used to do it. What do we see, right? We're going to talk about what does our policy say. We need to make sure that we remain compliant, make sure that we respond and adhere accordingly. Maybe different divisions, maybe different subgroups of your organization have different dress codes. And all of a sudden, here we are bringing them together. How are we going to address something like that if it's a dress code policy that we're talking about? Okay. Maybe they're created to help protect, and when we decide to work for the agency, we need to follow the company's policies. I'll throw out one example of a pretty bold response I saw. We were in some non-agency training for another group that I do some work for, where we deal with a lot of volunteers. And we were at a training that was going very well, but we had that one participant who was sitting there. We talked about nonverbal, sitting there with their arms crossed, really closed off. It was obvious that they were that captive audience for the training. And he started rolling on this response, where I used to work. And he said, I've done it this way for the last 20 years. And boy, the instructor stopped him right there and cut him off. And she said very simply, and do you want me to let you do it wrong for the next 20? And, that brought some of us some chuckles in the classroom who have dealt with those difficult participants. But as we've seen in our chat window today, if we challenge a student like that, we're going to definitely cause them to check out for the remainder of the training. And the danger of that, of course, is who else in the group are they going to take with them? Yep. We all have different rules, don't we? Because we all different. And we need to make sure that not only are we different in our agencies, but that we respect those differences in our classrooms. Very well. Let's take a look at question number 4. And this will be the last scenario that I wanted us to take a look at and do a little brainstorming on. So let's take a look. Take a look at this one. We're giving the class instructions for a group activity as it deals with communication skills. Okay, and here we go. I can't believe I'm even having to attend this training. I've worked here 20 years and nobody has ever listened to a thing that I've had to say. How do we respond to this distraction? kind of one of those tricky ones, right? How do we keep this student engaged? How do we value the experience, the life experience that they've brought to our classroom? But how do we address this? What can we do? Thank them for expressing, right? Thank you for, what do we see Geraldine says, sharing their concerns so that we can take them into consideration. Absolutely. Validate. Next we see scrolling in, maybe I'm sorry to hear that, right? Sorry that you feel your opinion doesn't matter. We'd love to hear your voice and how you can participate and lend to this discussion. And then we can take those things into consideration. Absolutely. Share with them. That's a perfect point. Make sure that maybe that 20-year employee, maybe they could attend a T for T. Maybe get them involved in teaching in some classes to get them involved. Absolutely. Some great points. We want to always make sure that we try to find the high road so that we can take it and keep our students engaged. Or, as we saw earlier in our chat window, to maybe what we need to do, maybe the best thing, maybe we need to take a quick break, depending on the attitude or the inflection of voice that came with that. And then ask that student if we could speak with them in private for a few moments. Offer some suggestions, offer them some encouragement. All right. But we also need to make sure that we've got that ground rule established so that we know if we get that student back in the classroom, that student knows that we need them, number one, to participate. We need them to follow the ground rules, and we need to make sure that they're not going to try to harpoon or take us down for the rest of the training block that we have together. Right. Use them as a point of input so that the rest of the classroom realizes immediately and sees, you know what, I can speak up because they do care about what it is I have to say. Maybe we're going to let them make sure that they can provide some input and be helpful to us. Some great points have been shared. I thank you for what you've chatted in. We are just about to the end of the allotted time that we've had. And as we close, I want to say, number one, thank you for your participation. This is one of the great things I like about the Iactp, is our ability to kind of meet together on this global platform and share our experiences and to learn from one another. But what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to pick one of these 3 sentence stems and complete that sentence in the chat box as we wrap up. So one thing that I learned from this training was, and fill in the blank. Or one thing that surprised me about this training was, fill in the blank. And then my favorite is the instructor in the front of the classroom. The first thing that I am going to try is blank. So scroll in there for us as we close and help us kind of tie a nice, neat bow on this hour that we've gotten to spend together. Prepare questions in advance. Absolutely. Thank you. All right. Set goals for myself and my students. Yep. That's a great takeaway for us from today's presentation, because we know we got to work our plan, right? But before we can work our plan, we've got to plan our work. And if we are those research, if we take a look at the evidence-based principles that we work from, we know that what gets measured is what it is that gets done. I would encourage you, as we wrap up, I want to make sure we stay on time. I would encourage you to go to our iactp.org website, take a look at the full functionality of us as an organization and how we can help you meet your needs as a training organization and as a training professional. And most importantly, we would love to see you in Nashville. Come and help us talk about these titans of training. How do we develop the trainer and how do we lead the profession? Thank you for your participation. Thank you for the chats that we've shared. Our time has come. We need to close our presentation. So thank you very much. Thank you for joining, and thank you for signing on to learn with us today. Michael, back to you for the sign off.
Thanks, folks. Just watch for my email later today with the evaluation link and your certificate. We appreciate your participation.
Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.